want to get into topic number 2. This is going to trigger some people, folks. So get ready. When you talk about PlayStation right now, right? There's not a lot of positive talk. There's just not. So I want to throw up a Prophet NYC picture that he posted on Twitter that really is the conversation with PlayStation right now. So bear with me for a second. I have it queued and ready to go. So get ready, folks. If you are a Sony guy or gal, you're going to get triggered. And I'm not doing this for console war. I'm doing this for an absolute purpose in the conversation that we're about to have. So PlayStation, right, is a corporation that to some gamers you're not allowed to question what PlayStation is doing, Fuzzy Belvedere. We see, like we just saw moments ago, and we continue to see in an Xbox conversation chat that Xbox is shit, right? Xbox is a brand that nobody wants. They can't sell consoles. We've heard welfare pass, right? We heard people, Xbox players don't buy games. They rent them. We've heard all the conversation. When Phil makes a decision, it's the end of the brand. Xbox is dying. But whenever PlayStation does something, anytime anyone, and I don't mean just Xbox folks, I mean like anyone questions their methods, what they're doing, why they're doing it, it's shut up, sit down. It's PlayStation. They can do what they want. They're market leader. Well, folks, I'm going to show you a picture right now that is and what PlayStation is. Check this out. Right there, folks. This is what PlayStation in 2025 is right now. It's the only conversation that if I put it this way, if you're a PlayStation fan, you should be concerned. This is what PlayStation is in front of you, folks. Concord failed. Marathon, potential failure. Fairgames, I said fail games. I didn't mean that, folks. That was an accident. Fairgames is probably going to fail. I didn't mean fail games, but it works. Look, the reason why I bring this up is we got a story here from GameRank.com. It's posted by Motion Baggery. Now, this was posted. When was this? Posted 1 day ago. The lead title says, rumor, Sony has no marketing plans for Marathon next quarter. And we saw this happen. This was posted on Friday by several of the big sites where it appears that Sony Interactive Entertainment, SIE for short, has pulled all of the marketing dollars for Marathon in the next quarter when it's supposed to release. Obviously, there's been a significant amount of bad press for this game. And you got to remember, folks, this is a game from Bungie who is probably one of the best FPS gunplay shooters in the business. Now, if you don't like Destiny or Destiny 2, I understand it. I'm not going to fight you on it. But from my point of view, when I did play Destiny, and I played Destiny 1 and 2 a lot. Now, I haven't played in many, many years because, again, it's just one of those games that just sucks you in. That's all you play. I ain't about that life. I do that for Call of Duty, for Halo, and a few others. I can't add another one to the ranks. It's just too much. And of course, Division is coming back in a big way with their update. So I'm going to be back in Division with my brother and our old crew. But Marathon is, I think, walking a razor's edge of disaster, Fuzzy Belvedere. Okay? When you hear that more than 2, potentially 3, even more so than that, artists have come forward and said that their artwork was stolen. This is not the first time for Bungie. This is probably the 5th or 6th time for Bungie. And at this point, it's disgusting, right? Like at what point does someone, because I saw a lot of people trying to defend the art director. Well, he gets paid the big bucks, right? He's the art director. You have to make sure that you're crew is actually doing what they're supposed to do. This is a corporation, and it's a corporation part of a bigger corporation in Sony. So you got to make sure that whatever they're doing it the right way, right? Well, that wasn't so much the case. Now, this is coming off of a alpha that a lot of people walked away unenthused, right? And there are other games out there like Arc Raiders that have stolen the conversation zeitgeist. So obviously, Bungie and Marathon find themselves in a bit of a pickle. And then this story happens late Friday afternoon, where you start hearing that the actual marketing budget has been pulled from this game, which suggests that it's going to be delayed. And that's not a surprise, considering that you've seen many people calling for this game's delay, right? Obviously, we heard Paris Lilly talk about it. We heard a couple of the big journals talk about it. Paul Tassi, more specifically, did not one but two articles talking about what's going on with Marathon. And then, of course, we talk about Fairgames, and Fairgames is another incredible, I think, F up from Sony. This was a studio that was created by Jade Raidman, who left she's gone. Her studio is still behind, but the studio was purchased by Sony. That game had a very, very lackluster showing when it showed its CG trailer. And we've had some people talk about it, saying that it's basically a clone or a ripoff Fortnite and Division, and it's clunky. Man, that's not really that good. So those three games that I threw up on your screen earlier is what PlayStation is right now. This isn't console war. This is put on the big boy pants, ladies and gentlemen, and have an adult conversation. I don't know how you personally could be a diehard Sony fan, look at this, what we just put up on the screen, and be like, yeah, no, everything's good. Don't worry about them. They're fine. Let's get your thoughts on the potential delay of Marathon. Do you think that this is basically a done deal?
I think the delay is definite. I've made some responses on Twitter to people that were asking, well, what would you have Sony do? And I always thought Marathon was probably going to be a problem if it didn't have some sort of PvE component to it. Even if that PvE component is just co-op, I think that allows you more wiggle room for a player base coming off of Destiny. If you're going to eventually cease or wind down the support for Destiny 2, it would make sense to have some sort of PvE co-op experience, something similar, maybe not a direct ripoff of Helldivers 2, but some component to that in Marathon, to me, would make the most sense. Because let's be clear, when it comes to extraction shooters, most of them have something else to cover them to keep the players interested. Now, the exception to the rule being Escape from Tarkov, although they finally did their own, single player or offline mode that you can do, which people have been doing mods to do that. You could also do the offline stuff for a while, but they actually dedicated, more effort into making that single player part, substantial. They also made the arena, which was another thing that, kind of fills in for the battle royale aspect of things. But extraction shooters are, I won't say they're niche, but they are a smaller segment. Even if you look at the Division, which I still consider more of the original extraction shooter, although it didn't have as punishing of a playthrough or play as Tarkov. Although, let's say Tarkov started earlier, but as far as when it came to being a polished release, Division reached that goal sooner in comparison. But they always had the PvE aspect. It was always meant to be a co-op experience, and you had the basically the betrayal aspect was what was for the Dark Zone as far as the extraction shooter point. But you didn't have the punishing factor of losing all of your gear, just the gear that you acquired while you're in that zone type of thing. But with Marathon not having like a balance between that or some other component to kind of draw in the Destiny 2 crowd, I always felt it. I won't say it was doomed from start, but it either needed that to survive, or it was going to be a 2-year flash in the pan kind of thing. And as far as Sony right now, they had what would have been two, I would say, far-reaching hits as opposed to what Marathon could possibly do. Like if you look at the Great Web, I think it was what it was codenamed for the Spider-Man multiplayer game, or even if you look at factions. If they had, like, I still think if they just release whatever they have now in like an early access form and allow the community to kind of direct them and as far as the progress of the game and stuff, I think they would be much better off. Because look at how well the day before was wish listed and talked about until the whole behind the scenes story of that dev team being kind of nefarious as far as their goals with free employees or unpaid employees and reused assets and such. But imagine the Division meets The Last of Us, and that I think would be a longer lasting game for a Sony games as a service type of game. The other thing, they still have their current games as a service, which they don't really lean on that games as a service aspect with Gran Turismo 7 or even MLB, but those are still kind of a games as a service, but people don't really look at them that way. But Gran Turismo needs more tracks on a more frequent basis. They release cars, but they're usually only about 4 in a month, as opposed to like something like with Horizon and stuff like that. They usually have that amount each week. Now, if you look at the grand scheme of things, some of those cars are re-released into the game because of the way the seasons and the way the playlists work. But overall, you're looking at 900 cars compared to, I think GT7 is now in the 500 range, and the game is a couple of years old. So you would think having more cars and even having more tracks would be in their best interest, or have a mode that you can now build in Horizon, a no hesi mode where you're basically dodging in and out of traffic, which they already have the Tokyo racetrack or the Tokyo highway racetrack. They could just make that mode, and I think that would draw more attention back into the game. But another thing that, looking at PlayStation when it comes to their games as a service, there's still a Horizon game that I think leaked some images that look more like a Fortnite type of game. But
yeah, the original leak of it very much looked like they took exactly what Fortnite does with the boxy looking type of characters, and they just kind of slapsticked it on to Horizon. You know what's interesting? I want to run these numbers by you because you made mention of Gran Turismo 7. And you said they semi lean on these games as a service.
Yeah.
And this is why that there is something called mismanagement going on at Sony Interactive Entertainment, specifically PlayStation. Here's why. So I did a general search to see how many copies of Gran Turismo sold. Folks, I'm here to tell you, I was blown away. Nearly 15 million copies of this game, and I'm one of them. I bought it. I don't like it. I'm gonna be honest with you. I bought it for my nephew because he saw the movie and he wanted the game, and so he comes over, he plays it. Awesome, right? That's exactly what Sony would want. They got me to buy the game. Now I didn't buy it at full boat. I got it used, but it's still. But 15 million copies of a game of. And listen, you play it, you very much enjoy it. Now, does it need some tweaking? Does it need some more tracks and more? Absolutely needs all those things.
Yeah.
But it's a serviceable game. You very much enjoy your time playing it. My nephew Tyler loves playing it. Awesome. Why don't they actually work with what they have and double down on what's working? Instead of going, again, that picture I showed you earlier, folks, I'm sure someone's going to see that and they're going to be triggered. But don't get triggered at me. Get triggered at whoever's running PlayStation right now. Because ultimately, those 3 games are the face of the franchise right now. And it's not good. And I don't know when people are going to start talking about Ghosts of Yotai or something else. Because those are the 3 games that are taking up the narrative. So again, just going back to Gran Turismo and what you were saying, Why don't they double down on something that's working, Fuzzy?
That's a great question. I wish I had the answer on that. Like, they have the IP that they can utilize in that fashion for reoccurring revenue each month with active players, whether they're buying skins or tracks or cars or what have you. They have all of the building blocks for that. And when I was talking about for Horizon, when it comes to like the Horizon Zero and Horizon Forbidden West genre, they could easily turn that into a Monster Hunter game. And we saw how big Monster Hunter was this year. Not saying they have to copy like for like as far as Monster Hunter, but I think that approach, as opposed to a battle royale where it's, I guess, each one of the tribes against each other kind of thing, I think you would be better off using that more realistic visuals as opposed to a Fortnite visual and making it a Monster Hunter game against I always refer to them as Dino bots, but I think that would go a lot further as far as for the Sony player base for a multiplayer game where you're buying different skins for the different tribes or you're incorporating other Sony IP into that. It just seems to me that would make the most sense. But instead, they choose to go with something that's more of a Payday knockoff or, Marathon being this extraction shooter that has just had a bumpy road ever since they've announced it. It seems like one thing after the other that either Bungie hasn't quite finalized or figured out, or they're just trying to rush this to the market kind of thing, or maybe Sony's forcing the issue considering how much they've invested in Bungie and how much time they've spent on this, and the fact that it's taken away from Destiny, which should be a nice reoccurring revenue or breadwinner for them, but you barely see that in the top 15 on Sony's PlayStation charts. So it's got to be hurting them in some form or way, that knowing that they paid all this money for Bungie and they're not charting as well as something more recent coming from their competitor like Forza Horizon or even like Sea of Thieves and stuff. So it's like I wonder how much longer Herman Hulse is going to be there, not calling for his head in any way, shape, or form, but it just feels like that's the side of Sony that's kind of lacking. The guy that got the promotion, I forget what his name is, as far as the actual president of PlayStation, but when it comes to selling hardware, they're doing a bang up job as far as that's concerned. But when it comes to selling software, as far as their first party stuff or their partnered second party / first party stuff, like your Stellar Blade, which 1 million copies for that type of title seems extremely low. We'll see how well it does on PC. I expect it to do double those numbers on PC, especially considering mods being an option. But all things aside, it just feels like they're almost doing like Ubisoft, where they focus on the wrong, next big thing, or they already have something that could fit that next big thing, but they choose to ignore that and focus on, like Skull and Bones, which Skull and Bones, if it had just been the ship battle aspect of things, would have probably, been launched 5 years ago and it probably been a hit 5 years ago. But it's now, it's not quite what the people want, and they're still adjusting it and trying to make it more to what the fan base wants. But they spent so much development time and so much development resources in that regard that they'll never recoup it. And that's the same thing with Concord. Yep. The cost of the studio, the cost of the development time. With Haven and Fairgames, it was the cost of the studio and the cost of this development time. If that game winds up getting canceled, or if they have to do a complete reboot and restart, that's a lot of wasted revenue. Now, I'm sure people will say, well, Xbox has their, instances of that.
Sure.
Okay. So every while it had to go through a reboot, but they at least had something like Sea of Thieves with that reoccurring revenue to kind of cover their butts in that regard. Yeah. So that's the thing that Sony's kind of lacking with the reoccurring revenue, or having its own, title where it can collect 100% of the revenue when it comes to this games as a service or monthly reoccurring purchases of season passes or battle passes or skins and things like that. I mean, it's great making the 30% off of the other people's stuff, but making 100% is what they want. And that's why they had that initiative to make so many games as a service. And now they've cut it down to like the bare bones, where even the ones that had the most successful games as a service are now trying to do stuff on their own at this point, because For whatever reason, maybe Sony pissed them off, or maybe they just feel that they would be better trying their hand at doing it on their own, so they get 100% of the revenue as opposed to sharing revenue with Sony, even though Sony might be footing the bill for the development. But I don't know. They're going to have to figure out something on games as a service. I mean, it's great that they can always rely on their single player games, but when their single player games stop selling and they have to remaster them to resell them to you again, I think that's where people need to kind of take a step back and say, hey, we either want new IP or new sequels, as opposed to the same sequel being rehashed 3 and 4 times between 2 generations. So that's all I got.
No, I mean, it's a great point of view. Their budgets are expensive because they're movie-like games, right? The quality, again, maybe the characters themselves aren't for you. Maybe the IP isn't what you know is one of your favorites, but you do got to admit that Sony's games are fantastic to look at. They are movie-like experiences, and that movie-like experience comes with an expense, and that's why usually what happens is that when the developer, Naughty Dog, for instance, is done doing the game, it's then sent to another studio, the secret studio that Sony has, that makes it movie-like, that makes it look like a film. All right, that's extra development. Right now, and again, this is why I think Sony finds themselves in a bit of a tailspin, is the 3 games that we talked about. Fairgames is in uncharted waters. Marathon potentially is getting delayed to get a revamp. And what does that revamp look like? I honestly don't know. I didn't play the game, and extraction shooters aren't my thing. And obviously Concord is, well, that's old news. But I think the most interesting point of this conversation that does not come up in any other conversations other than on this channel, ladies and gentlemen, is the fact that the one successful GAAS game that they had, there are lots of players on Steam enjoying Helldivers 2. Game is still selling. It's getting content. Now, how many people on PlayStation are playing? I honestly don't have those numbers in front of me. But the interesting part, or should I say, the more concerning part of this conversation, is the fact that the team behind that game, Arrowhead Studios, is not only going to fund their own game, but they are going to probably make that game multi-plat. Why is that? Well, because Sony messed up. Sony lost them a lot of money, and what happened was it not last week, the week before, we talked about it. The head of the studio basically says when you 100% fund your own game, you can 100% make the decisions. Maybe that's not a big deal for you, but that is definitely a shot at over the bow with Sony. That there's no doubt about it. That is a, hey, and you know something, like I said, if you don't believe me, read the presser. Right after they said that, oh no, we're still good. We want to work with Sony. Sure you do. As a third party, because I'm absolutely sure that they could have made more money if that game was on Xbox, even if it was a 6-month or a year delay. Like, give all the PlayStation players time to run around with this giant W banner. Hey, we got Helldivers. I bought Helldivers. I bought DLC for it. It's a freaking great game. My brother didn't like it, but I loved it. Again, this is one of those conversations that's going to be ongoing until we see what happens with PlayStation. I think there's going to be a lot of moving parts in the next 6 months to a year, and it can't be just we sold more consoles. I think if you keep running that narrative, folks, you're doing it all wrong. Console sales are important. They're no longer the main draw of the conversation, and if you think that it is, then you need to get schooled on what makes money, because consoles do make money. But the truth of the matter is that software makes more.